So you got roped into eating Ionian food by some hottie. You scored, but now it's time to pay the price. When it's time to do your business and get the job done, what are you gonna use? Imported earth sandpaper? Not on my exhaust chute. And what? Some overpriced Ioan microweave synthetic? No thanks. You're in this mess because of them anyway. And at 10 credits a roll, who can afford it? No, you need to turn to the trusted megacorp who's always been in your corner. From the makers of the heavy Corvette Lifter, the mighty Athos Destroyer, and the rugged and dependable Jupiter F-1050 hover truck comes JATP, Jupiter Arms Toilet Paper. Made from all natural confiscated cotton, JATP has the highest wipes per second performance in class. No other brand is as dependable as your own backside for getting the job done. And at 1 credit a roll, it won't wipe away your bank account. JATP. Affordable, dependable, long-lasting, and made Mars tough. How you doing, everyone? This is Matthias Atva from Direct Dreadnought, your Dreadnought PS4 replay guy. Well, I haven't put out much in the last week because I was in Houston, Texas on a very important job, and I got back late Friday. And with the release of the new trailer for the Homeworld 3 game coming out soon, I thought I'd take an opportunity to draw your attention to some of the major sci-fi franchises and games of the past that have influenced me as far as capital ship combat and have also influenced the sci-fi and gaming community as a whole, and games that if you have not played should probably at least take a look at. In addition to that, there's also a couple of animes and shows I thought I'd mention, and this comes on the heels of the Carrier Part 2 episode that I released last weekend, and there seems to be enough support that I might make a Carrier Part 3 in the future. What I also wanted to do, as many players have come and approached me off on the side, is to make a quick little video this week, which I'll probably do today and release sometime mid next week, for possible replacement modules for the strike craft that are currently found on our current dreadnoughts in the game. And I thought I'd go into a little detail on how the dreadnoughts would be upgraded, what new modules they would get if carriers came out similar or exactly as the way I presented them in Carriers Part 1 and 2. And again, this isn't officially canon or endorsed by Jaeger or Greybox or 6-Foot, but I thought it's an interesting exercise that gets everyone's creative juices flowing and starts talking about the future instead of complaining about the past for the game of Dreadnought, and it seems to be something a lot of people are interested in. But before we get into that, how about a message from one of our other sponsors? So you're done with shift at Giant Spaceship Factory and want to numb headache and wash out chemicals from throat with comrades. You go to bar and what? We craft beer from Mars and get fat? Or maybe something fancy from Venus and lift pinky from glass? Your buddies make fun of you. And besides, I lost pinky in accident last month. No, comrade, you need something strong. Something to put hairs on the chest for the ladies. You need something made in factory. You need a Cooler Vector vodka. Da, a Cooler Vector vodka. It comes in many flavors like clear, ash gray, and strawberry grease red. If you cold, this warm you up, and you can use to start fire. A Cooler Vector vodka makes ugly woman into supermodel, and it breaks down grime and also removes stains. So come, 2 shots with comrades on time off and get sleep for a long workday. A Cooler Vector vodka, the last vodka you'll ever drink. Well, thanks for not skipping that ad, guys. Unfortunately, Direct Dreadnought has sold out to the 3 mega corporations, and they are my official sponsors for the channel. We'll have one more solar system Dreadnought commercial at the end of this video. Please don't skip it, because it's very important and it helps the channel out. Anyway, about Homeworld 3. The Homeworld franchise started probably late 90s and started with Homeworld 1, and it's a real-time strategy game that's very focused on ship combat. You can zoom in. They have many different classes, and what sets this game apart from other games is not only is it very awesome and competitive with great gameplay and graphics, but it also has a pretty awesome storyline. And then it moved into Homeworld 2, which continues the story of Homeworld 1, and also has a side story called the Deserts of Karak, and that is a really interesting game. It has to do with the past of this particular storyline, in which one of the factions comes from a desert planet with very little water. So instead of water navies, they actually have these giant treaded or hover land navies with these massive carriers and these massive ships on land battling it out with aircraft as well. The other interesting thing about this series is it's very class-based. It has a lot of the same features you'd find in Dreadnought. You have, of course, corvettes, many different types of strike craft that you form into squadrons. You can actually pick what sort of formations they take, which have advantages, disadvantages. They have scouts, fighters, bombers, cloaking fighters. They have numerous kinds of corvettes, heavy corvettes, light corvettes, anti-fighter corvettes. They have numerous types of frigates. This is where you would get your artillery cruiser size ships. They actually have something called ion frigates, which are basically artillery cruisers. They have destroyers, heavy cruisers, which are kind of the size of the way dreadnoughts are in the game of Dreadnoughts. And then they actually have motherships, shipyards, large dreadnoughts, and the action is great. It's a lot of fun, and the story is really, really good, and the graphics have always been great. And when you get into multiplayer and you have 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 battles, it gets really intense, and it looks just like some of your favorite scenes of starship combat from some of your favorite movies. And it's really a blast, and I highly recommend the game. The Homeworld Remastered series is both Homeworld 1, Homeworld 2, all the factions, and that's super cheap, very easygoing as far as the necessary graphics and processor speed on your computer. It's a classic game. If you're ever bored and want some space-borne real-time strategy where you can zoom in to the ships fighting and it looks like a game of Dreadnought, or you can zoom out, take command of 30 plus ships, hundreds of fighters, battling it out in 3D space. It's really intense and a lot of fun, and really cheap and easy going on your computer. The other game I want to mention, which some of you know this game, but it's not as popular as some other games, is Sins of the Solar Empire. Sins of the Solar Empire is a fantastic game. It's very, very easy going on your computer. Even though the latest installments are fairly recent, the engine was made to look good on a macro scale and look pretty good on a micro scale. And it's very easy going on your processor. You don't need a lot of graphics. It's not like a lot of other real-time strategy games where you need a $1,000 computer or more to play. This is something you can play on a relatively old computer, and you can get the entire Sins of a Solar Empire package on Steam for something ridiculous like $16-20. I used to play this game a lot. To give you an idea of the scale of this game, it has corvettes and fighters, but they're not really controlled individually like in Homeworld. The fighters are controlled in squadrons, and corvettes are almost like fighters. They're like a bunch of Nevises flying around without shields. They're pretty easy to take down and very cheap, but the smallest real ship unit that's basically the grunt of the game is the artillery cruiser, and you can have missile cruisers, artillery cruisers that are the size of a Jupiter Arms artillery cruiser, and you can have 50 to 100 of these per side per battle, or more sometimes, and they're the lowest grunt level ship in the game, which is pretty cool, pretty intense. It moves up to cruisers, which are more or less combat oriented tactical cruiser size ships. Then of course they have larger ships, and these aren't getting into the capital ships. The whole point of the game is these capital ships, and the capital ships are really the size of dreadnoughts in the game of Dreadnought or bigger, and they come with special abilities that not only are they combat abilities and defense abilities, but there's buff and debuff abilities and all these great things, and they gain experience, which helps them use these buffs, debuffs faster, gives them better hull, better shields, a whole bunch of really interesting stuff there. I think each faction has several classes of capital ships, something like 8 classes of capital ship. And on top of that, there's an economy system in the game where you colonize planets like Stellaris or Masters of Orion 2. You colonize and build up planets. The economy in the game isn't overbearing, so it's enough detail to get the job done, but it doesn't take away from the ship combat. And we've had games in the past where there's literally thousands of ships and even more fighters on a solar system map that has 20 planets to fight over. It's really crazy and intense. Besides that, they have star bases, research ships, all sorts, and a whole infrastructure around each planet that you can attack, such as shipyards, research stations, trade ports, all this sort of stuff. The scale, the macro scale of the game is pretty intense, and the micro scale is important too. And a lot of times micro is so difficult in this game that's one of the few games where it's really hard for a really good player to have few losses. You go in there and you're going to lose ships, you're going to just get overwhelmed, and sometimes what just happens, and it's really crazy. And then you get into the sequel of the game, which is part of the Steam bundle, and that has Titans, or Dreadnought Titan, and these things are 4 or 5 times a Zeme or a Jutland or Monarch, and they have even more abilities, and each faction, each player can have one of these Titans. One of them is a giant, almost planet-killing artillery cannon. Another one is a flying fortress. Another one is a ship that eats smaller ships like a giant insect. And even though it has no solo campaign, it has a really good story that's set up where you don't need a solo campaign. It is one of the few criticisms of the game, but it does have a story, and it has 3 unique factions, and each faction is broken down into 2 sub-factions, so you get 6 different factions with completely different gameplay and completely different Titans. So it's a really good game. I would check it out. It's super cheap, and again, not taxing on your computer. The last game I wanted to mention, which was a big influence, I think, on the Dreadnought game and for my carrier episodes, is an old game. Again, you can find on Steam. It's multi-part, and it stars Mark Hamill, and that would be Wing Commander. A lot of people don't even know about the Wing Commander series. You're basically a starfighter pilot, and you're fighting almost a World War II Pacific-style battle with the Kilrathi, which are these evil cat aliens, and there's other aliens too. And there's actually part 4 of Wing Commander is a civil war between the humans, and it has all the different kinds of ship classes. They have corvettes, destroyers, carriers, dreadnoughts, the whole thing, except you're in a fighter and you're flying in between these ships and fighting while they're duking it out, and it's very interesting. It's mission based. You actually have some missions where you fly through carriers, fly through battle stations, and you fly into the planet's atmosphere. Sometimes you can escort Marines to an objective and fight off enemy fighters while they're doing their thing. And the most interesting part about the Wing Commander series from Wing Commander 3 on is that it's live action cutscenes and talking while you're flying. So parts 1, 2, and 3 were done in the old computer days, 1990s, technology and it was all computer art, and then they decided to take a different route. And you probably want to start in Wing Commander 3 unless you get really involved in the story and want to backtrack and play some of the other older games, which I find still very enjoyable, but they're not as cool as the live action. And Mark Hamill, you are Mark Hamill, and this is one of his really popular roles in the gaming world and what he's known for after Star Wars, besides being the voice of the Joker. I don't know if you know this, but in most Batman games and Batman cartoons, Mark Hamill is actually the voice of the Joker. It's a little bit of trivia there. But there's a lot of cinematic cutscenes that are the same quality, sometimes better, than the Wing Commander movie that was made that had nothing to do with Mark Hamill, which is a shame because I found the games more enjoyable than the Wing Commander movie that was released. And it's very interesting, very fun game. It as well, since it's so old, is available on Steam and is cheap and is a great play. It doesn't have multiplayer in it. It's just a one long player campaign, and parts 3, 4, and 5 are really, really good. They're a lot of fun to play, and you really get involved and invested in the story because there's real actors portraying the pilots, the captains, the ships, the crew, even the aliens, and there's some pretty decent cutscenes involving capital ships and hand-to-hand combat on ships. It's like being involved in a very, very long space movie that's very similar to Dreadnought, and I think it's great. So those are the 3 games I wanted to draw attention to that I got a lot of inspiration from for making a comprehensive carrier series for Dreadnought, and a lot of tropes and genres and things in Dreadnought and other space sci-fi ship battle franchises have their roots in these games and some of the TV shows that I'm going to mention next. But before I get into some of the TV shows, animes, and movies that helped influence me and the game of Dreadnought, let's get one more message from our last sponsor here on Direct Dreadnought. You have many choices in mass production products on the market today. Soulless corporate overlords with no regard for people, the environment, social justice, or the finer things in life. Here at House Oberon, we take a more holistic and sustainable approach to serving your needs. For every credit you spend on Oberon products, you are doing more than just purchasing a handcrafted product lovingly made with the highest technology. You are giving back to the solar system, helping to support a diverse community of dreamers, helping to feed those less fortunate and those who have suffered from injustice. That's why here at House Oberon, we pledge to give back to the community and donate a portion of our profits to help support just causes like the Tots for Trans nonprofit and the Solar Association of Trans Rights Activists. Because at House Oberon, you are more than just a customer, you are a valued friend and ally. House Oberon, the only openly pro-trans corporation in the solar system. Make your credit count. Okay everyone, we're back. Thanks for not skipping those ads. Again, Direct Dreadnought depends on the support from the solar system's 3 giant megacorporations to keep the channel going, and watching those ads really helps the channel. So I thought I'd do a quick little part at the end introducing you to some TV shows, animes, possibly movies that you may not have heard of, that besides things that you have heard of like Star Wars and the like, that have had a huge influence on the epic space battle genre for sci-fi. The first one you should really check out is The Expanse. The Expanse is still ongoing on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's something Daniel from Space Doc. Many of you know Space Doc. It's a great channel if you're into this sort of thing and you're into the game of Dreadnought, but you like the space battle genre. You should probably check out his channel if you're not already subscribed. It's really great. But he and his subscribers helped save this show, and it's really great. It has very realistic physics in its battle, and it's solar system based like the game of Dreadnought, with factions on Mars, the Belt, Jupiter, and of course Earth. And the action is really great, the story is really compelling, and the quality of the graphics and the realism of the show is top notch, and you should really check it out. It's very compelling. It's like Game of Thrones in space with less betrayals and much more space combat. It's pretty awesome. The other thing I want to mention that you probably haven't heard of is Space Above and Beyond. This was an old show that got canceled, unfortunately, after only a season and a half. Kind of like Firefly, which is, again, Firefly. I'll mention that in a bit because that's a great show. But Space Above and Beyond was more of a Earth versus alien situation, and the aliens had us on the back foot, and Earth had to mobilize and industrialize, and came out with these awesome Ticonderoga class carriers, and they had Marines, and Marines in this weren't like foot soldiers. Space Marines were pilots first, and then shipboard defenders second, and away mission Marines third. So it was a very interesting take on how Space Marines would be instead of these super armored super soldiers, or instead of grunts on some random battlefield. You know, planetary battles didn't really happen in this show that much, because to invade a planet of millions or even billions, you need such a colossal force that it's really not realistic. So everything was pretty much space-based fighting between ships and small outposts and things like that. It's very interesting. The acting was great. It took on some very serious themes without crawling up its own ass into social justice or anything like that. It took on these themes very early, such as equality of women in the Marines without bringing attention to it. They just had female Marines, and they were badass, and you liked them. They also had a take on racism. There is an arc about racism against Asians instead of any other people, and I thought that was interesting because that really wasn't done so much. And they actually had the whole trope about understanding the alien and what started the war and who's really responsible, and all these cover-ups and everything. And it was a very intense show with very good graphics, very good acting, and some decent ship designs, and some great designs for the Hammerhead fighter that the humans use. And it's only a season. If you ever find it, it's worth watching. It's pretty decent. I also want to mention Firefly. Even though Firefly is a great show, it's like a space western with a great story, great acting, great director, great actors and actresses. If you really want the space combat, you should probably watch the movie version of it, which is Serenity. And that was basically a movie that had a lot of fan support and made a decent amount of money, and was closing off and tying up loose ends from the show, because the show only had a one-season run. And again, with a lot of these shows, they were great shows, but unfortunately when a sci-fi show hits it big, the stupid studio executives pit these shows against non-sci-fi shows, and they almost always lose. They lose almost every time. When you put a really well-written, good graphic, high space battle content, good story sci-fi show up against the Jersey Shore is going to win every time. And that's why a lot of these shows only lasted one season, but they're still treasures, and they still have a lot of influence on our current sci-fi genre and meta, and they have a lot of influence on the Dreadnought game and on me, and also a lot of you, because I've talked about all these titles with some of you as well. Some animes I'd like to mention: Legend of the Galactic Heroes, both the old version and new version. They're almost identical, except the new version has much better graphics, but the old version, which has like 1980s style anime art, it's not comparable to today's awesome computer-generated anime art, but it's still really good, and the story is amazing, and the scale of the ship battles in Legend of the Galactic Heroes is completely nuts. Every battle has tens of thousands of ships duking it out, and it's very intense, and you get to see the strategic decision-making behind it and some of the personalities in this crazy space opera. Of course, another show I'd want to mention is Battlestar Galactica. Needs no introduction. If you haven't seen the new or old Battlestar Galactica, you should give it a watch because it has a lot of space combat in it and a lot of great stories. And of course, lastly, I'd like to mention Gundam. Gundam, even though it replaces fighters with mechs, flying mechs in space essentially, even though Gundam Wing and Gundam 00 were still great series, Universal Century Gundam, like the original Gundam, War in the Pocket, Operation Stardust Memory, and more recently Gundam Unicorn, continue the original Gundam story and are really, really good, as well as Gundam Thunderbolt. And they have a lot of different ship classes and carriers, battleships, destroyers, corvettes, and basically they're giant space battles replacing fighter craft with giant flying robots. And it's a great watch, has a lot of combat, and the newest versions of the series have very good, intense art. Well, I wanted to wrap it up there. Unfortunately, I didn't get to make a lot of videos last week because I was in Houston, but I'm going to try to pre-record some while I'm going to Western New York this week and keep you guys entertained. We're up to 191 subscribers, and I'm so thankful for that. Our community keeps growing, and Dreadnought keeps surviving. I was playing last night, and even though my first couple games I had a 10-minute wait, it immediately kicked into 2-3-minute wait, and I think I counted 4 games back to back where I pressed the play button and it immediately sent me into a game, and I thought that was great. And I just wanted to say thanks for keeping the channel alive, and thanks for showing me a lot of patience as far as my work schedule the last month and a half, and we're getting towards the end of it, so I only have a couple more weeks of being out of town every week, and then my schedule should get better. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the sponsors for Direct Dreadnought. And even though I haven't gotten around to putting it together yet, me and Sharky still want to put out that dual view replay cast. And we'll also have a small little episode about some potential replacement modules for Dreadnoughts if they lose their strike fighters. Well, that's it for me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.